time that anyone who has questions or observations, comments, that we can share all of that together. Um, so what I wanted to do this morning is share with you the shape that my sitting practice has evolved into over the course of the last 10 years or so. And some of the reasons that I've landed where I am now. And hopefully at the end, I can get into some of the sort of details of the physical aspects of that that might be interesting or helpful for some other people. So as GD mentioned, my career was, or maybe still will be, we'll see. As a musician, I'm a bassist, a teacher, a composer, and I worked since I was an adult as a professional musician, playing and around all over the place and doing lots of various things. I had the opportunity for many years to teach at bass workshops in various places around the country, including, or I think for more than 10 years now, I've been teaching at a workshop in the summer in Kansas City. And in 2017, I had an accident there at that workshop. I was teaching, it's held at a high school, and I was teaching on the stage. You can imagine the stage in a sort of big high school auditorium. And I was in front, and there were, I don't know, 70 bassists. I was demonstrating something, and then I went to go to the back of the stage. I was carrying my instrument, and it was dark at the side of the stage, and there was an edge that I didn't see, and I walked right off the edge of that stage, carrying my instrument, and fell onto a staircase. It took, I don't know how long, months to sort out what all the sort of damage was to my body from that. I fractured bones, I tore tendons, I tore ligaments, I cut my head open. And part of the reason it took such a long time, I guess, this is not really relevant, but I'll mention it, is that because there was this cut in my head, everyone was really concerned that I had injured my head, which well, I didn't, other than the cut, and I was reassured over and over by people that, oh, all this pain in your shoulder will be fine. It'll resolve. You're going to be okay. And after months, it wasn't okay, and I began seeking out some more specialized care. And I had the opportunity to work with some really brilliant therapists and doctors, which led to a lot of improvement in sort of fits and starts over the next few years. In spite of that, there was a period of several years where I was in pretty constant physical pain. And I came to believe that I would never be able to play my instrument again. Which the pain and the loss of connection to my artistic output, and through that most of my social network, had pretty difficult sort of psycho-emotional consequences for me. I felt like I still really wanted to be engaged with practice, but Zazen, as I had normally done it, and as I had been taught by, my teacher and the sort of Zen culture around me, was not possible for me. For one thing, there was sort of very few sort of ways in which I could sort of physically be in the world that didn't cause pain. And in addition, I have a history going back to adolescence of living with mental illness, which was probably exacerbated by all of this. And so things were not at all stable for me. And my sense at this time was that actually it felt dangerous for me to do our sort of traditional Zazen practice. I didn't trust my mind. It felt My mind felt too sort of treacherous to keep it on that loose a leash. Um, so I began to experiment with some things that I hadn't really touched on before. The first things that I began doing, and I had experimented with these earlier when I had been having struggles, uh, psychological struggles, was to use some like recorded guided meditations. Um, and I think, that's really there's there's overlap, and there's overlap, and there are things that are in common and complementary in doing that kind of practice with the traditional practice that we do, but it's pretty different. And I guess I had been resistant to it. I didn't like the idea that there was somebody, I don't know, that there was somebody sort of in my mind, in my mind, sort of pushing me around and telling me what to do. Um, but I did find it possible. Um, so that was really encouraging at the time. And and actually I found there there were some recordings by Jack Cornfield and in particular and some others that actually were I found really really deep and helpful. So that was good. Um, and Also at this time, around this time, I had a phone call with my teacher. And I said, I told him I sitting just wasn't possible for me, um, physically and psycho-emotionally. And I asked him, I probably felt a little bit ashamed to admit that. Uh, and I asked him what should I do? And his response was kind of surprising to me. First of all, he was kind of like, all right, well, it doesn't matter. You don't need to sit. It's not that big a deal. Um, and which was, I don't know, that was surprising to me, I guess. And he said, just his suggestion to me was that I should just go outside. I should walk outside and I should sort of engage with the sounds of the natural world. And it was pretty simple advice. Um, it sort of, gave me permission, I guess, to take that practice that I already had been doing, to take it seriously and to think that, I don't know, yeah, to think that kind of practice could matter. It could mean something to do that. Um, and that opened me up to the idea that there are practices from outside of this sort of, mm, maybe this word is too pejorative, but sort of parochial Soto Zen tradition, that could be important and meaningful for me. Um, so another thing that happened during this period of time was a sort of reconnection with a practice from a totally different tradition. Um, uh, This is called, well, this is from Alexander technique, which I had studied a bit a few years before this in connection with my work as a musician. A lot of musicians are interested in Alexander technique, and I'll talk more about what that is in a minute. But this particular practice is called, it has a few different names. They call it constructive rest or active rest, or even sometimes it's often just called a lie down, which didn't occur to me at the time, but now I think it's interesting that they call it just a lie down, and often we call our practice sitting. And I think that's kind of interesting. And the reason I reconnected with this practice was this was one of the only things I could do that relieved my physical pain. Um, Maybe I should say a few things here about Alexander technique because I'm going to talk a lot about this. Alexander technique is, if you're not familiar with it, was developed by a guy named F.M. Alexander, who was an Australian actor born in the, I don't know, late 19th century, I guess. Was most active as a teacher in the 20th century. He was Australian, and he developed this technique that came to be called Alexander technique because as an actor, he was having a very uh, a very difficult problem, which was that he kept losing his voice, and he would go to the doctor, and the doctor, I don't know, gave him some things to do to recover his voice, including, well, don't speak for a while and all this kind of stuff. And he thought, well, if don't speak for a while is the solution to this, then obviously the problem is the way that I'm speaking. There's something in the way that there's something in the way that I'm using my body that's I'm causing this. I'm doing this. So he was this kind of incredible autodidact person who began studying himself in the mirror, looking at what he did, and through sort of this gateway, developed a pretty fascinating and substantial understanding of how the body works, how we use it, and how we misuse it, and its connection with very importantly, its connection with the mind, and that we are able actually, and this is really important, I think, we are actually able to make choices about how we use our body, even though normally we act on habit or karma. He didn't use that word, but we act directed by our habits. And if we don't do something to interfere with that, that's what we'll do. But we have the opportunity to make a choice all the time. And that's opportunity to make a choice about something as simple as how I hold my body, how my neck is. This is my interpretation. That's where we find freedom, actually, is in the opportunity to make small choices moment by moment. So the word for this kind of interaction with ourselves in Alexander technique is inhibition. Inhibition. When I first heard that, I didn't like that because I don't know, I have a negative association with the idea of inhibiting things. But what it means is basically to pause, to not do something, to choose not to do something so that you can consciously choose how you're going to do it. And to me, this is a description of how we can live by vow rather than living by karma. So all this is going on in my head, I began to reconnect with my Alexander technique teacher. And I remembered a couple things that I had seen from Zen teachers in years before about Alexander technique. Um, so one of them, his name is, I don't know him personally. I've interacted with him on the internet a couple times years ago. His name is Taigu. He's French, but he lives in Japan now. And I think he's one of the teachers at an online Zen community called Tree Leaf, I think is the name of it, which is a pretty interesting thing to check out if you haven't ever taken a look at what Tree Leaf is up to. Anyway, so preparing for this talk, I looked up Taigu and what he had said about Alexander technique, and in his bio, he wrote this. I believe that Alexander technique provides a real and living understanding of Zazen. It allows Zazen to be alive, fluid, and dynamic, as opposed to what I met almost everywhere, a fixed and rigid form that feeds intolerance, arrogance, and ignorance. So, I didn't say that. He said that. Don't blame me. But I'm glad he said it. Because I think it's right. I'll get into more. I do want just to talk about part of his thing here at the end that I have come to feel over the last years that Zen practice at least as I've experienced it here, is profoundly ableist. It is inaccessible to people who have physical obstacles. It is inaccessible to people who struggle with mental illness. And that's part of what I came up against in these last years. And I just want to put that, I'm going to talk more about that as I go on this morning, but I wanted to put that out there just as questions for us as a community to wonder about. If you haven't already wondered about them, maybe you have. I don't hear much about it. So another Zen teacher who I had heard talk about Alexander technique is a teacher in my own lineage, sort of a Dharma cousin of mine, of ours, named Isho Fujita. Probably most of you have met Isho or encountered Isho in some way. He's taught in the US a lot, and toured around all various Zen centers, and he's a really charming, brilliant guy if you haven't had the chance to interact with him. He, for maybe a couple decades, lived and taught at Valley Zendo in Massachusetts, and practiced at Antaiji in Japan, and has a lot of interest in an emphasis on the physical practice of our sitting. So he wrote this. To give Zazen instruction, we often say, straighten your back. Keep your eyes half open, half closed, to regulate the body. Make your out-breath long. Do abdominal breathing to regulate breath. And do not think anything. Focus your attention on your breath to regulate the mind. I think there's a big problem here. Zazen should not be something forcefully built up by imposing a ready-made mold onto our body-mind from outside. It should be what is naturally and freely generated from inside as a result of non-fabrication. There is a danger that a rote way of giving instruction is leading us to change Zazen into Shuzen. I apologize, I don't know what he means by Shuzen here. I meant to look that up and I don't know. If anybody else knows, please tell me. In Zazen, the spine should elongate by itself instead of our lengthening it by effort. So this critique of our traditional pedagogy for Zazen is pretty interesting. I think, in particular, I want to focus on these couple sentences in the middle of what he wrote. He said, Zazen should not be something forcefully built up by imposing a ready-made mold onto our body mind from outside. It should be what is naturally and freely generated from inside as a result of non-fabrication. Um, I have begun to feel or continue to feel like I want to delve more deeply into the physical instructions that we give and internalize for Zazen practice. What Isho-san describes in that quotation that I read is very similar to what Dogen wrote in Fukan Zazengi, for example, although Dogen's instructions are even more limiting. I think probably all of you are familiar with them, so I'm not going to read that paragraph. But I'll point out, probably all of you know, that in Dogen's instructions, we're given two options. You sit on the floor in full lotus or half lotus. Those are your choices. I'm willing to bet, looking at the faces on here, that there aren't many people who sit on the floor in full lotus or even half lotus. Um, and that's fine. You know, there are a lot of things, there are a lot of cultural things and things that change over time, and I don't. It's you know, I I am curious. I do wonder. I wonder what Dogen would say if one of us said, "I really want to practice zazen, but I can't sit on the floor." Would he say, "Tough luck"? I don't think so. Um, it reminds me of there's a story that my teacher, that Okumura Roshi, has told before about when he was practicing at Antaiji. Um, he was one of the only people there that had any English at all, and I'm sure at this time he had very, very little. Um, but somebody came to the door, I think an American, and they wanted to practice, and they were trying to communicate with whoever had let them in. They couldn't do it, so they asked Shohaku-san to go speak with this person. And what the person was there, they wanted to practice zazen, but they couldn't sit on the floor, and they were asking, "Do you have a chair that I can sit in?" And this is an incredible little fact, but there literally was not a chair at Antaiji. They didn't have any chairs. And so Okumura Roshi told this person, "I'm sorry, we we don't have any chairs," which is just an incredible, to me, an incredible cultural thing. Anyway, and what this person said to him was, "Someday you're going to have to deal with this." I don't know if that was the exact phrase, but something like that. And Okumura Roshi has told the story in the context of, probably all of you know, that now he sits in a chair. He's sat in a chair for a number of years now. Um, and it's interesting to think, I think that person didn't mean that Shohaku-san personally was going to have to deal with it, but sort of Zen culturally would have to deal with people needing to sit in chairs, which is true. But, Okumura Roshi came up against this personally, and he has been quite open that at that time, at that inflection point in his life, he wondered if he would continue to sit or just stop sitting. I think, and he took it seriously. He thought, oh, maybe I just won't sit anymore. But he decided to sit in a chair, and I think that's an incredible, for those of us who have practiced with him and sort of take what he has to say and what he does seriously. That's a pretty important, interesting teaching. Um, Boy, I'm going to run out of time, and I thought I didn't have enough to say this morning. Ay, ay, ay. Okay. Um, in Opening the Hand of Thought, Ujiyama Roshi wrote, doing Zazen is to be full of life, aiming at holding a correct Zazen posture. This phrase, correct Zazen posture, is fascinating to me. What is that? That if that's our instructions, be full of life. I don't really know what that is, but I can kind of intuit maybe what he's getting at, be full of life. Holding a correct Zazen posture. This is trickier, but it does mean, I think, obviously, that Zazen is a physical practice. What we're doing with our bodies is important. It must be important. And I think it's clear that I'm pretty underwhelmed by the sort of instruction and traditional instruction and training that we get. So I have started to think about my process as sort of like increasing the level of like zoom or magnification on a lens that I'm aiming at the physical set for my Zazen practice. I want to, before I get into more detail about this in the last 10 minutes or so, I want to emphasize for anyone who has any doubts about this, that there is not a single way that you should be practicing. For me personally, I've trained myself to be on sort of like alert for that word should. Um, I see that always as a red flag, as a opportunity to examine something when I say to myself, oh, I should do something in a particular way. Um, I think we need to practice uh, with how our lives are manifesting. And that is never a failure or insufficient. That's all that is, those are your resources, and you need to use your creativity to find a unique way to live and practice and express that for yourself in the world. So that said, my practice is in a continual state of sort of evolution. But right now, I think about it, my formal sitting practice, as having sort of like, I think of it in sort of like 5 parts. And this is sort of the order when I sit down to practice in the morning. This is sort of my order of operations. First thing I do is I deal with my physical set. This relies on principles of Alexander technique largely that I'll try to explain briefly in a minute if I have time. Um, the sort of second piece is my psycho-emotional set. This largely relies on Thich Nhat Hanh's version of the instructions from the Anapanasati Sutta. I use the first sort of like the first several of those. Um, Probably all of you know this, but it's available freely online. His translation, I think he calls it the Discourse on the Full Awareness of Breathing. His translation, I should say. And from there, I'll say either I sort of let go of all of that and I practice in the traditional way, shikantaza that I've been taught, or if I can't do that because of where I'm at, psycho-emotionally, I'll stick with my physical instructions and my psychological instructions to give myself an anchor. Um, these days, I'm feeling good, and I'm enjoying the opportunity to practice shikantaza, and that's nice. Um, and then after I sit, these days I always finish I read something, some short text to my silently to myself, and then I do a dedication. I will admit that I used to feel very, very disconnected from the dedications that we chant in our services. Um, I thought that it felt like sort of like nonsense. Um, but these days don't, I feel that really, really the opposite way. Um, I really want, you know, whatever karmic effects are generated by my practice activities, the positive energy being brought into the world. I want to offer that to everyone. I hope that that's offered to everybody, including myself, and that it has some impact in the world. So I want to do that dedication to express. I do a dedication to express that. So that's the shape of my practice. I want to spend a couple minutes here, and then I'll finish up, and we can talk about anything anybody's curious about. I just want to talk a little bit about this idea of this physical set in Alexander technique. Um, I already mentioned the idea of inhibition. Um, the the sort of pair to inhibition are usually called directions in Alexander technique, and those are kind of I guess they're a little bit like gathas in a way. It's like silent instructions that I'm going to give myself. So I might, if I was going to bend, if there's something on the floor that I want to empty the dishwasher, I need to bend over to empty the dishwasher. The first thing that I'm going to do is not bend over to empty the dishwasher. The second thing, and then I can give myself directions about the way that I'm going to do that. And that gives me the opportunity to use my body rather than collapsing and crunching and doing something and shortening and taking that opportunity to shorten it and make myself small. I can take that opportunity to lengthen and do it in a way that enlarges and is healthy for my body. I can't get into all the details of that, but it's just as an example. This is the pairing of inhibition to do something in our habitual or karmic way, to say, no, I'm not doing that. I have a microsecond and I choose how I want to do something. Um, is it related to um, another pair of concepts in Alexander technique called end gaining and means whereby? End gaining is basically what it sounds like. The tendency we have to sort of keep our mind and our actions focused on the end result, on what we want at the end, and lose sight of how we do it, which is the means whereby. Um, so Alexander wrote that the act performed is of less consequence than the manner of its performance. I think this is I think this has a lot of resonance with our Zazen practice. Um, and and I think my experience is that focusing on each and every piece of the way that I'm practicing supports all the rest of the pieces and creates a sense of freedom and ease and calm, um, which is really helpful and conducive to the opportunity to make choices in my life because I can see the opportunity to do those things, to do that because I'm calmer than I was. So, I have time. not really. But well, I'll say a last thing before I stop. The first instruction that I give myself after I sit is I say, allowing the earth to support me. I, I modified this from an instruction from one of my Alexander technique teachers who asked me to allow the chair I was sitting in to support me. And I thought, oh, that's really profound to allow something to support me. And if I modify this as I sit to allow the earth to support me, this is a sort of multivalent expression. There are different directions we can consider this from. But from a physical perspective, what I'm looking for here is an investigation of how I can do less with my body in my sitting, how I can accept the support of the earth beneath me, how I can accept the support of the natural structure of my body, which wants to sit upright, if I stay out of its way and allow it to do that. Um, Maybe next, if I have the opportunity to speak with you again, I'll get into a little more detail about this, about the actual what's what I'm looking for here, physiological structures that I'm talking about here, and the way we interfere with them, and the way we can choose to stop interfering with them, so that we'll naturally sit upright. Our spines will naturally lengthen. Our backs will naturally widen, and our sitting becomes much more comfortable, for one thing. Um, and becomes, I think, because of that, more we begin to have the opportunity to physically manifest beautiful instructions like Shito's expression of, um, the floating white clouds do not obstruct the vast sky, which is my favorite description of our practice. And we can look for ways, that we don't obstruct our body, which is also part of the vast sky. So I'm going to stop there for now. I'll just say last thing, if you're interested in any of this and you want to see what I'm doing, I am writing about this kind of stuff that I'm interested in: Zen, Alexander technique, dog training, which I didn't talk about today, which is incredible. Those of you who know me, the fact that I didn't bring up dogs is some kind of miracle. Um, uh, yeah, but I am writing about all of those things on my blog, which is at my website, just my name, doanroessler.com. Um, so I'll just stop there. Thank you so much for coming this morning and listening. And anybody who has comments or questions or whatever, please jump in.
No, and I thought it was interesting that you pointed out that maybe we shouldn't consider this to sitting as a particular position, because I have been listening to some podcasts by Jendo Koan, who is a, do you, if you must know him. He,
Yeah, co-teacher with Taigu at Tree Leaf. Yeah.
yeah, yes, truly, yes. And apparently he has for those of you who don't know, he has a sangha of people who basically cannot make it to a traditional Zen center or temple for one reason or another, usually because they're homebound or they're infirm. And one of his sangha members was complaining that he didn't feel like he was able to participate because he couldn't sit. He could only lay down. So one day, I guess, Jundo said, everybody's going to lay down for Zazen today. And I thought, that's exactly the kind of thing you're talking about. We don't necessarily have to be in this particular sitting position. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you.
Doan, can you hear
Morning,
me?
Ado. Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd just like to say thank you very much for it was very interesting and helpful, partly in just understanding your journey, but also in the ideas of thinking about things differently and expanding the possibilities, and maybe it's not as simple as this, but paying more attention to what our body needs to do and not just the external instructions given to us by someone else. That we need to kind of discern that, what that is for me individually, and just talking about it kind of gives the person a little freedom to think about that, like, oh, well, maybe I need to explore sort of what I need, what I need, not just what I'm told. And anyway, I found it very helpful, and I thank you very much.
Good. Thank you. I'm so glad. Yeah, I think you, I mean, I guess if I can restate what you just said slightly differently, I would say you are allowed to explore. You are encouraged to explore, but you don't need to. If you can do what you can do what you're doing, and it's all good. No, but I think no, I want to say that because one thing I didn't bring up today that I thought about as I was preparing this was the extreme importance of the details of the language that we use.
Mhm.
Um, uh, it really, really colors and shapes the way that we do the way that we do things and the way that we feel about things. And so I don't say it to correct you, but just to encourage us just to be careful that we're being kind to ourselves and being gentle with ourselves. Yeah, but thank you. So nice to see you.
I want a PS. I mean, maybe this is
Hmm.
obvious, but becomes more and more important as we age, um, and develop new limitations and need to figure out, oh,
Yeah.
does this mean I can't sit, or does this mean I can't do Zazen? What does it actually mean for me to adjust to this body that is changing? Um,
Right. Right. I mean, to go back to Dogen, right? I mean, Dogen died when he was 53. Um, he didn't have to deal with an old body.
And actually, I must say that when Shohaku Roshi Okumura made this change, I was quite impressed, um, the way he sort of graciously did this, and accepted it for himself, that this is what he needed to do. It was very
Yeah.
freeing because I didn't expect that, frankly. And so it was a very good example for me, to see, oh, well, you mean I could adjust, I could change, I could do, I mean, I could pay
Yeah.
attention and not just follow the script. Um, and
Yeah.
yeah, anyway, that was helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I like you, I've been listening to and following what he has to say for decades now, and yet I still sometimes miss the point, which is that he is often saying, you don't have to do it. Don't do it this way because I'm doing it this way. Don't, find your own way. You need your own expression in the world. You need to be yourself. It's over and over and over. This is what he's saying, but somehow, you know, doesn't quite get through my thick skull.
So there is an expression that Dogen used and talked about, and also Katagiri Roshi talked about, is Sanzen is Zazen. Right?
Mhm.
So Sanzen sometimes is translated as surrender. So I think this is basically kind of Alexander technique in a way that you just surrender the tension, surrender the
Mm.
struggle. So I think the elements that you're talking about have been there all along. It's just kind of we we focus on we have a tendency to want to grab things and make them into a dualistic deal, and so we want this proper correct posture, blah blah blah. But inside
Mm.
inside that posture, there can be surrender. There can be uh, give, giving up of the tension. So I just wanted to bring up Sanzen is Zazen.
Thank you, Jan. It's really nice to see you. Um, yeah, and I want to just highlight something else you just said, which is that everything I'm talking about today, I think, is already contained, like you said, you know, in the tradition. What I like, I think what I talked about this. I think of myself as just kind of trying to zoom in or amplify it for myself to see it in more detail. Because I don't know why, but maybe there's an assumption 800 years ago that you didn't need to say this. I don't know. People knew how to sit on the floor without hurting themselves. I don't know, maybe. But I need more detail for myself, so I'm trying to create that. Yeah. Thank you.
Doan, thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you. Let's see. I had Adel-san, when you were saying that you were surprised by Shohaku's way of adapting when he moved from the floor to the chair. I tell you a little anecdote that surprised me about Shohaku-san. When he was just becoming the abbot of Minnesota Zen Center after Katagiri Roshi died. To my knowledge, I don't remember any time that Katagiri Roshi yielded to not using incense. In, you know, I don't. Maybe someone asked him to not use it. I wasn't aware of it, but I never ever saw him not offer incense, in a session. And when Shohaku was there, once someone said, "Can we not do incense?" And I kind of cringed, and I thought, "Oh my God, what's going to happen?" And he said, "Oh, sure, let's just use water." And I thought, "What?" So it was just like this. It was no like drama or, "Oh God, no, I can't give that," something like that. Yeah, we can just use water. And so that was a very interesting teaching for me. And then I thought also when you were saying when that person came to Okumura Roshi back at Antaiji and said, And Okumura responded, we don't have a chair. And it made me think when you were asking your question, how would Dogen respond? Well, I actually think the question never occurred because 825, if they don't have a chair at Antaiji, like 40 years ago, I don't think 825 years ago they would have had a chair at AAJ, except the big one that you see Dogen sitting in, but he's sitting in full lotus on the chair. So anyway, he probably just didn't have to deal with it because there probably only like 10 chairs in all of Japan in those days. So everyone had to sit on the floor from the time they're babies. So it just wasn't
Right.
much of an issue. That's my theory.
Right.
That's my theory that helps me deal with the fact that I can't sit on the floor anymore. So,
Well, you use what you need.
and then I'll just say I'm never going to find another opportunity for you to come back and talk, so you can talk about whatever things you didn't talk about today. So,
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Doan, this is Alan Williams.
Hi, Alan. So nice to see you.
Good to see you. I'm really happy to see you and be able to reconnect in this way. And
Me too.
thank you for sharing your story. And I'm feeling like I've had some inklings about some of the things you've been talking about. And you've articulated them in a different way for me. So I think that's helpful. But I feel like I've been adjusting my Zazen practice all along, and will continue to do that. And your talk encourages me to do that. So thank you.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you.
I'll just add one more comment. The first time I heard about Alexander technique was in about 19, I don't know, doesn't matter, mid 80s, something like that. And it was from Daigaku Rume, who was
Oh, really?
really surprising to me because I think he's about the most traditional Zen monk that I know. And he was saying he did this Alexander technique and he was very impressed by it. And this was, 40 years ago. So
Yeah.
kind of, but he was open to, I didn't know anything about it then. It was just, all I knew was working with the body. And he was very enamored with the practice. And I don't know how, I haven't talked with him about it recently, if he still practices it or not. So anyway, thank you
Yeah.
for bringing it up because I don't know too much about it myself. Thank you.
When Teijo came
Yeah, of
back from
course.
Japan, she mentioned Alexander technique, and she brought an Alexander technique teacher to MZMC, I remember, because it was just such a thoroughly confused and muddled presentation that I got absolutely nothing out of it. And so it's like, I have no idea why people think so highly of this because nothing came across whatsoever. So, but the attempt was made. I'll
Yeah.
say that the intent was there. So
It is a notoriously difficult thing to talk about. Probably like Zen in that way.
yeah, this was a person who applied it mostly to people who played piano, and she was definitely challenged for trying to apply it to people who were sitting on a cushion. I'll say that.
Interesting. Interesting.
We have we have about 3 minutes left, and I just want to give people who haven't spoken an opportunity to bring their voice into the circle before we close? I'll bring my voice into the circle then. I just really appreciate you, Doan, in your expression of the Dharma. And I feel that language, that is critical, and often very subtle as far as how we express, and in that expression, who we're including and who we're excluding, just unconsciously. So I really appreciate you in your expression of the Dharma and opening it up to us. And also, yeah, for sure, I said this is not one and done. We invite and welcome your voice into the circle. And also for people's information, we're going to be offering a study group, and Doan will be one of the facilitators. So please join us. So we have 2 minutes left. Would anybody like to say the last words before we do the closing chant? Okay. Well, thank you, Doan, for
Thank you, everybody.
your words, your presence. We really appreciate you. And with that, I'd like to close with the 4 vows. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you, everybody. Next week, Kyoku Tracy Whalen will be offering the Dharma talk. And thank you. Thank you all for your presence. Thank you for your generosity. And please, if you're able, offer dana to Hokyoji. That would be greatly appreciated. So thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you.